Hi, everyone, and welcome to a Dart Drones webinar on drones for state departments of transportation. So just before we begin today's webinar, I wanted to let everyone know that we are recording the webinar. So due to that, if everyone can be sure to mute yourself just to eliminate any background noise throughout the webinar. The mute button can be found on the control panel, which is on the right side of your screen. And if you're calling in on your phone, if you could just mute yourself, that would be great. Also, after the webinar, you will all be emailed a link to the recorded live session as well as today's slides. So if you feel like you maybe missed a section, that information will be available for you to go back and review. Today, we will be diving into the various use cases and benefits, as well as ROI, training, and program tips. We'll also be holding a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So if any questions come up as we're going through today's material, please feel free to submit them in the chat section, which is also on your control panel, and we'll be sure to answer as many questions as we can during that Q&A session. All right, so we have two great speakers today, Colin Romberger and Tony Fernando. Colin is both a private pilot and advanced ground instructor and holds a master's degree in UAS design and operations from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. He holds multiple FAA airman certificates for manned aircraft operations, and he currently owns and operates a drone services company in Pennsylvania, which focuses on mapping and inspections. Colin is also the chief pilot and consultant here at Dart Drones. Tony is the UAS program administrator in the Aviation Safety and Enforcement section of the Minnesota Department of Transportation Office of Aeronautics. He previously developed an unmanned aircraft program for the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, where he was an assistant district biologist. Tony also holds commercial pilot, flight engineer, and remote pilot certificates from the FAA. So with that said, I will pass things over to Colin and we'll jump into it.
Okay, appreciate it, Alicia. We'll just get the screen going here for everybody. All right, perfect. So again, I appreciate the introduction there, Alicia, and again, thanks to Tony for jumping on as well. Before we get rolling into our case studies and talking specifically about the use of unmanned aircraft for departments of transportation, I just want to give a little bit of history for Dart Drones and the services that we provide. Dart Drones, we are the nation leader when it comes to in-person drone training, as well as program development and consultative services. We offer open enrollment flight training courses, everything from basic flight to Part 107 test preparations at 42 different locations around the country. And we also offer quite a bit of application-specific training as well, very centralized around the specific operations that our clients need, either as an open enrollment offering or as a private training. And in that capacity, to date, excuse me, we have trained well over 8,000 pilots on both our in-person offerings and then also including our online offerings as well. On the consultation side, we've been privileged to work with a wide variety of both public and private organizations. So we've worked with public organizations at the local, state, and federal level, as well as numerous private companies in, as we said, a variety of industries, energy, engineering and construction, agriculture, you name it, we've worked with them, broadcast media, etc. We're privileged and really in a unique position that we've had the chance to really get to know the needs of our clients in a lot of different capacities and be able to provide them with the training that their folks are going to need, not only to get legal and be able to operate these systems in the eyes of the FAA, but also to be effective with their operations. And that's really the biggest part that we find is that it's one thing to pass a FAA exam and get that certificate. It's a completely different thing to have the understanding and the prowess with your equipment to be able to go out there and gather usable data that's going to be able to be utilized to actually give you a positive return, be it financially, economically, or all of the above. So, or even time and safety, obviously. So that being said, we're very glad to have Tony with us today to share some of his experiences working specifically within Department of Transportation in Minnesota. Before we switch over and really dig into the meat of what Tony has prepared for us today, I'd like to bring up a few recent items that have been of really of great importance, I think, in the scope of just unmanned aircraft news over the last, we'll say close to 12 months, probably about 8 months at this point. That's really been a game changer, or is going to be a game changer when it comes to the types of operations and the usability, we'll say, of unmanned aircraft in a variety of areas around the United States. First off, one of the more recent developments that we've heard of that was just announced a couple weeks ago, the FAA is preparing to issue a formalized, and they've already issued what's called an advanced notice of proposed rulemaking that is going to give us some more usability when it comes to small unmanned aircraft systems under our current Part 107 regulations. Specifically, what they're looking at doing is adding in the ability to fly unmanned aircraft over non-participants, so members of the public, and that's going to be based on a weight classification system from what we've seen in the draft of the rules that they've put out as an advanced document, and also the inclusion of night operations parameters into standard Part 107 operations. So no longer with a need to have a specific waiver to conduct those night operations. And what's really, I think, important about this is that first item there, the flight over non-participants, and looking at the weight of the system or other safety parameters as a basis for that. Obviously, when it comes to supporting roadway operations for departments of transportation or other firms that are involved with roadway projects, flying that aircraft over moving traffic has been one of the big limiting factors with how many departments have been able to utilize these systems, or if they've even chosen to use them at all. Many have said, what, we're just going to kind of hold back because most of what we need to do is going to need to take place around these roadways, and we don't want to get into any problems there. So that's been very important. Also, at the end of last year, we received word that the FAA did issue the first wide area or blanket waiver for beyond visual line of sight operations, and that was issued to State Farm, or I'm sorry, Allstate Insurance Company, I believe, and part of their participation as a member of the pilot program in that was put out by the Department of Transportation for UAS operations. So they worked with a company that was affiliated with Virginia Tech, I believe, and they did significant testing to show that their foam fixed wing aircraft could be utilized reliably and would not pose an issue as far as damage or accident potential to property or people located underneath that aircraft when flying beyond visual line of sight. And it took a lot of testing to be able to do that and document things the way the FAA wanted to see it done. But they received the first that allows them now to fly not just in one specific area or one designated location beyond visual line of sight, but essentially in any area of uncontrolled airspace under the parameters of that waiver. And that, is very encouraging because we know that is the future of these systems. And again, if we're going to utilize these to be able to cover large areas and really gather a lot of data for us for roadway projects, et cetera, that having that ability is really important. Finally, the end of last year in the fall, the FAA completed the initial rollout of the LANC system for low altitude authorization and notification capability, which gave us the ability in many areas to get instant airspace authorizations so that we could conduct our small unmanned aircraft flights under those Part 107 regulations without having to wait months to get those different authorizations back. Now, this is still, do still have some areas where manual authorizations are necessary. The manual authorizations are coming faster though, and we expect to see, a continuation of usefulness and access, we'll say, to different areas of our airspace as time goes on. So in terms of different use cases for departments of transportation, as I mentioned earlier, we've been privileged here at Dart Drones. We've had a chance to hear the needs and the desires of a lot of our different clients and be involved in preparing their operators to utilize these systems for a variety of different purposes. And I'm going to let Tony really highlight what they've been able to be most successful with today as far as utilizing the systems with the Minnesota Department of Transportation. But before we get to the case studies, just some of the general items that typically come up. One, in terms of tracking and monitoring, obviously roadways are critical infrastructure, and when something goes wrong on those roadways, we need to be able to see the extent of what's occurring, really try and gauge the problem in both a large scale and small scale perspective, and then be able to figure out what's the best way forward with that. So that could be natural disasters, as we see over on the left. Unmanned aircraft have also been used to monitor traffic flows and determine, over a period of time, what's going on in certain areas and provide more insight into how those problems might be able to be solved. We've worked with a lot of law enforcement agencies as far as documenting accidents and vehicle accident scenes with unmanned aircraft for a variety of purposes, and obviously very important, and can also be used by other agencies outside of law enforcement that are responsible for clearing up debris and things like that from those accidents. And then the normal progress that takes place with construction projects along our roadways, being able to fly those sites and gather widespread imagery is really a force multiplier when it comes to planning and overall just keeping track of progress over a particular site location. So very valuable in those regards. The other big area that we hear about is with inspections. A lot of our infrastructure along our roadways, be it bridges, tunnels, overpasses, whatever the case might be, those facilities need to be inspected on a regular basis as well. And Tony's going to speak to this and some of the projects that they've worked on where they have had a lot of success in using the aircraft, and talk specifically about the rewards and that return on investment that they've seen. So being able to, again, use the aircraft to get to those hard to reach areas, see things without putting humans in harm's way, putting them into dangerous situations, really does make a huge difference, regardless of how we're going to use the capacity, the exact capacity that we're using the aircraft for those inspection purposes. I even was driving just in Pennsylvania not that long ago, and saw an unmanned aircraft that was being used as they were repairing some of the cracks and things in the roadway, because with the resolution that we're able to get from those cameras, it can really be flown over a given area pretty quickly, and all the potholes, all the cracks, all the things like that that need to be repaired are very easy to identify once those images are collected and organized in an effective way. So again, very useful tool for that. And really, whatever the need is, ultimately at the end of the day, the biggest benefit of an unmanned aircraft system is to gather data of a large area in a quick, efficient, and safe manner. And that's true of any application when it comes to using unmanned aircraft. It's all about how can we take this aerial perspective, which is very useful for a lot of different reasons and in a lot of different ways, and how can we make that work for us and be able to capitalize on the benefits that it's going to provide to us. So it could be scientific research, it could be in support of any of the construction projects or engineering projects that we've talked about. It could be for emergency response, or even just asset management and control. So I'm really glad that we have Tony with us today, because he's going to be able to speak to their successes, their challenges, and we're going to go ahead and start talking about some of the ways that they've been able to utilize unmanned aircraft in recent years with the benefits of using unmanned aircraft. So, Tony, I'm going to go ahead and we'll pass it over to you, and we'll go ahead and get rolling here.
Thank you, Colin, for the lead-in. I'm Tony Fernando from the Minnesota Department of Transportation. We have had a drone program in one form or another since about 2015. It started with policy development. We were operational first in our bridge inspection office by 2016, and then last year our photogrammetrics office and our land management unit started using drones as well. And we're in the middle of a large expansion in the number of units that do operate them. At MnDOT, we do have three things that we need to see at least one of for any of our drone operations. That's a increase the safety, a increase in cost efficiency, or an increase in data quality for whatever the drone's being used for. If we don't have one of those three things, we really don't want to be in the business in doing that operation, even if it's cool. We're a relatively conservative, engineering-focused organization, and our stakeholders, especially early on in the policy process, really did not want to see MnDOT personnel playing with drones or a perception that they were playing with drones.
Sure.
So what we consider to be the most important aspect of this is an increase in safety, and there's a couple of different ways to look at that. Many of the operations that we do are inherently hazardous. People have to go over the sides of bridges, people have to climb radio towers. Obviously, if a worker never climbs a radio tower, he can't fall off of it. If a worker never has to go over the side of a bridge, can't fall off of it. And the less time we have somebody in an exposed work area, the less likely they are to get hit by traffic or have other really bad things happen. And we take all of that very seriously. It's a little bit difficult to quantify benefits from that. Over the long run, we do expect to see a reduction in number of loss of time injuries and OSHA reportable injuries, but our program has not really developed enough data to establish that. But obviously some of that's common sense too, as far as just keeping people out of these risky areas. When we're using drones, and I put on the slide that it reduces risk to workers, it also reduces risk to the public. Anytime we have a lane closed, especially on something like I-35, there's a chance to have what we call secondary accidents, where people approaching the work area have accidents that they wouldn't have had the work zone not been there. If we can minimize the length of time that a work zone's open because the drone is doing the work faster, or the data collection is faster, even if the post processing takes longer, then that's a benefit to the public. It saves time in the commutes, but it also could be preventing injuries. One of the neat things that we found as far as safety once we start using drones is we have a lot of things in the state that we're responsible for, and some of it doesn't get inspected. In the lower right on the slide, that's one of the entrance monuments that's at the border of the state of Minnesota. Most states probably have something similar when you enter the state from another state on the highway. In our case, these are concrete and stone monuments. They're about 20 feet high, and they were not being inspected. Nobody was going out to check the condition of them. And we were able to use a drone to go out and build point clouds, but also get close-up photographs of these monuments to establish their condition. They're all in good shape. And it saved having to send somebody out with a truck and a very tall ladder, or trying to arrange for a lift truck, where our lift trucks have other taskings that they're assigned to. So this ability to be safer and be sure that you're safe and that your infrastructure is in good shape using a drone is one of the biggest benefits that we're seeing at MnDOT as far as our drone operations. The other thing that we're getting is we have a large increase in flexibility. So I don't know if most of the audience is DOT type personnel, but if you are, you probably think of photogrammetry in terms of seasons, where you have manned aircraft come in and they're in state for about 2 weeks. They do large swaths of ground, and if you have a situation during that time period, you can retask a manned aircraft. But if you have to get a a mapping aircraft to come and shoot a site during the middle of the summer, which is not traditional photogrammetry season for Minnesota, it can get very expensive very quickly because you're paying transportation relocation costs for that company to move an expensive to operate aircraft into your state to fly one site and then leave. In this case, the images that we have here, this was Trunk Highway 23, which is between Minneapolis and Duluth. And it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere the site was, but we had a bridge washout due to heavy rains that we had over this past summer. We were outside the photogrammetry season, but this is where our photogrammetric unit had just acquired a drone, so this was their first live mission. They went out, they were able to shoot the site within 2 days of the request and build the point clouds, which were then moved into the CAD programs for the engineers to look at whether they wanted to do a repair to the culvert that had failed or whether they wanted to re-engineer the entire bridge altogether. So when we're talking about flexibility, because we are something of a, I mean, we are a very large organization, and there is a degree of bureaucracy involved in doing our operations. This is a hypothetical workflow for a request from a district to get mapping on a site. The request has to come from a district. So photogrammetrics doesn't know in advance where they need to produce maps of. Aeronautics, we don't know where somebody is going to need us to fly. So one of our business units needs to tell us that they have a need. But once they do that, photogrammetrics would go out and define the ground control point network. There are considerations that go into defining that, and we have certified photogrammetrists on staff. Working with photogrammetrics and my office, we would define the flight plan. We'd send a survey crew out from the district because they have licensed surveyors that are in each of our districts, and they would go out and paint the targets on the ground. Either aeronautics or photogrammetrics flies. Our photogrammetrics unit does the post-processing, and they are working on using some customized software to do that. It's not Pix4D, but a lot of people are using Pix4D and similar turnkey packages to do that processing. They certify the products and then get it back to the end user. The total turnaround on this is around 48 hours for a small area, assuming everything goes well and we're able to fly shortly after the request has been made. We are not to the point, and we don't expect to be at the point where we are going to provide district survey crews with drones that are in the truck and they just go out and push a button and produce a map. In order to meet our internal standards, we just don't see that coming for a very long time. The other thing that we look for is an increase in cost efficiency. And going into this, MnDOT expected benefits both in time and money. We did collect a lot of data in the process of our bridge unit, and that's been formally assessed. So this is the summary table in a report that was done by Jennifer Wells in our bridge office, and Barrett Lovelace from Collins Engineers, who was the major contractor on this project. And they went out and they inspected 40 bridges. They estimated what the manual inspection cost and time to do those inspections would be had it been done using traditional means, and they tracked their costs for the drone-based inspections. What we found is that we got about 40% cost savings using the drones, and that's a lot. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars inspecting bridges in Minnesota. It's a very politically sensitive topic because we've had, unfortunately, a bad disaster in our past. And when we can save that much money and keep people off the sides of bridges, that's undoubtedly a good thing. What did surprise, I think, everybody was that we were not seeing the time savings that we originally expected to see. Some of that we're attributing to our somewhat bureaucratic workflows. Some of it we're also attributing to this being a fairly new technology and the people involved are taking longer to post-process data than they will 2 years from now when they have a lot more experience doing it. So I was invited to this presentation to talk about return on investment, and from a government standpoint, it's a little bit different than from a commercial standpoint because we're not gaining revenue from our operations, we're spending your tax money. We're looking at this mostly from a cost-benefit type analysis. Slide. So to dig in a little bit further, this is the underlying data from the table, and this is one of the inspections. Bridge 4175 is this one is a 4-span pedestrian bridge, and what we see here is that we did have a cost savings associated with this. We still did have to have a person and a vehicle inspection, bridge inspection vehicle out on the site to put somebody over, but we were able to reduce the amount of time that inspection vehicle was on site. And those inspection vehicles are expensive. They run from $250,000 to $500,000 to acquire, and they have a high daily operations cost as well. They also involve lots of people being out in the work zone. So we're able to shave on that bridge 1 day of inspection vehicle time off. We also reduced the amount of labor for on-site, but we did have to have somebody working on the post-processing for a full day. This is a 1-span 2-lane bridge. In this case, the traditional inspection means would have been cheaper. We have the people on site for the same amount of time. This one was in a location where it did not actually require a snooper truck in order to see on the undersides. And as a result, the drone inspection ends up costing a little bit more, again, and it comes out of the post-processing time. And we are spending money, and a significant amount of money. So between 2015 and 2018, the bridge office has spent on average $115,000 a year. In land management, we spent about $40,000 a year, and that's exclusive of labor. And then in the Office of Aeronautics, we did have to bring myself on full time in order to administratively oversee the drone programs. We do think that it's important to have aviation knowledgeable people doing that oversight. One of our biggest concerns is that we do have what we feel is an engaged and professional workforce, but they're not necessarily pilots, and they're not necessarily aviation safety minded people just because they've never thought about it. And our worst case scenario really is that somebody that we haven't reached from my office, who's a highway maintenance worker, goes out and buys a drone and starts flying it on our work sites, a drone that they own on our work sites without us knowing about it. There's very large liability issues should that happen, especially if they start to breach some of the regulations. That leads into, I guess, the need for training your workforce that's going to be operating this, but also training the people who are not operating this to be aware of what's going on inside the agency.
Yeah, that's great, Tony. Obviously, we talk training quite a bit to everyone that we're working with, and we've seen firsthand. I think the really when it shined the light on to us, or came to the forefront for us, just how important it was, not just for Part 107 or FAA training necessary to pass that test, but actually the operational use cases. Was shortly after those Part 107 regulations came out, and at that point in time, we had a lot of folks that came to us and took one of our test prep courses, and they went out there, they were successful, they got their certificates. Even in those early days where a lot of the questions were still having you figure out weight and balance on manned aircraft and things like that, but shortly after they would get out in the field, and they were either having problems where they were losing aircraft and just making unfortunate costly mistakes, or more commonly, because the systems in recent years, have become a bit more intuitive and a bit more user friendly, but more commonly that just unable to get good quality data. And so, usually the request from us was, hey, how can you help help us, get our maps to look better, or how can you help us, make sure that our photos are actually we're able to see the areas of interest and the items of concern and damage like that we need to identify to make this thing useful. Tell us a little bit about your experience with training and what you guys have been doing, what you've seen.
So certainly one of the things that really needs to be amplified over and over again is, like he said, the 107 certificates are really just not enough. We definitely know that we need hands-on training for our operators who are going out there. In our case, in order to start up a new program, and again, we have several in process right now, we need a business unit to identify a need. So in my office, we have a lot of aviation experience, but we're not necessarily road engineers, we're not necessarily bridge engineers, and we're not going to try and tell somebody how they should go about inspecting a bridge or inspecting roadway cracks or something like that. And we have workflows for acquiring drones or for contracting out things that need to be done with drones. But after a business, if we're going to be training our own people, the business unit will identify what their need is, and then they identify what people to send. We have not really set on a standardized level that we expect our operators to be at. In some cases, there's senior engineers. In some cases, they're closer to frontline workers. People who are selected by the business unit then need to get Part 107 training either out of my office or from a third-party contractor like our hosts, and we'll accept either within MnDOT. We then need them to get some type of application training. Again, if we're doing inspection type work that's specific to their business case, we do expect them to have somebody train them on inspecting a radio tower, inspecting a bridge. Some of that has not been available and is available in the marketplace now. Some of that, is done under research contracts and stuff like that. Once the crew is trained, they can conduct operations, but during the course of those operations, we in the aeronautics office, we review their flight and safety plans, we monitor demonstrations of proficiency, and we do periodic spot checks on flight operations to make sure that they're being conducted safely. It is critically important for a government agency to not be operating, it's critically important that we're not operating in an unsafe manner. It's also, from a reputation standpoint, critically important that we're not operating contrary to regulations. And because contractors do not appear as contractors to the general public, once people see the orange barrels in Minnesota, it's MnDOT who is considered responsible in the minds of the public. We can't have our contractors operating contrary to regulations either, and so we do oversight out of my office in order to make sure that everything is being done in accordance with aviation best practices and regulation.
That's great. And Tony, what are in some of that oversight that you've seen, any examples that you can give of the more common, we'll say, mistakes people might be making in the field as far as those safety standards or regulatory standards?
I think at the moment, as far as our field operators, the ones that we are allowing to do operations are pretty have become immersed in the aviation culture of safety that you have in aviation. Where we see issues is in project planning. People want to do operations over moving traffic, and yes, that potentially could change. What's allowable could change in the near future, but it hasn't changed yet, and so we essentially don't want to be doing operations over moving traffic until that does. We had several wide area authorizations for operations in controlled airspace, and we've almost entirely replaced reliance on those to using the LANC system to get our authorizations. That's worked out really well in Minnesota since it came online in October.
Yeah.
And then, things like not thinking about flying at night, requiring additional equipment attached to the drone, the strobe that's visible for 3 miles and so on. And it's not, people, when an aviation person sees that, they think in terms of some entity certifying that visibility, whereas other people are like, oh, okay, this seems like a bright light, maybe. And that's certainly not sufficient in this type of environment.
Sure, absolutely. That's great. Well, I appreciate you sharing some of your experiences, Tony, and I'm sure everyone in attendance today does as well. Being able to hear that, and be able to actually see some of those facts and figures and the numbers as well. One of the last things that I want to just touch on is as far as a wrap up there and chime in wherever you see something, Tony, is the tips for training. And I think we hit on it a few times now. Part 107 definitely is not enough. You need to make sure that the folks that are operating those systems for you not only understand those Part 107 regulations as far as determining where can we operate, what do we have to consider as far as our place within the national airspace system, and making sure we don't cause conflicts for others, but also how are we going to make ourselves most effective with these systems. So the need for that application specific training is paramount, and also making sure that all of your operators are operating under a set of approved standard operating procedures. That's I think as critical, if not even more so than that application specific training, because if we don't have a framework for all phases of our operations, from the initial pre-flight planning and project planning stages all the way through that post-processing and data distribution, data security concerns, how we're going to handle that imagery and the products and things that we're creating afterwards. We open ourselves up to various types of liabilities. So very important that we're covering all those bases. All right, so I'll ask Alicia. Alicia, do we have any questions from the group that we can answer at this point?
Great, thanks guys. So we did receive a few questions, so I'll just start running through some of those. Tony, this first one is for you. Someone wants more information on how other state departments of transportation are dealing with privacy issues. They said our legal team reviews every flight plan we have and are paranoid about images capturing license plates, pedestrians, etc.
So that actually is going to come down a lot to the state of privacy in your state. Our legal department originally was reviewing every flight, and they have backed off of that. But in Minnesota, we do have a wide network of traffic cameras, and there are license plate readers and things like that. So some of that was already fought by other programs here in Minnesota. We also are pretty cognizant of whose land we're flying over. Generally, if we're talking about a road, MnDOT has a right of way, and that gives us a right to have our equipment in the area and to take photographs of it. And we certainly don't go out of our way to take pictures of other people. So that's kind of where we are. Our legal department no longer considers it a high concern, but if it pops up again, it pops up again, and that's going to be a political problem for us.
Gotcha, thank you. And another question for you, Tony. Someone asked, what are you doing with the data captured from bridge inspections? Are you presenting a report to engineers or inspectors? I think you kind of mentioned this before, but.
So we have a standardized bridge inspection form that has to get filled out for each bridge, whether it's done using a drone or we have people on site who are doing it. I believe it's an FHWA form. Like I said, I'm not a bridge inspector myself. So these inspections are primarily for the purpose of getting the data to establish to fill out that form that gets filed with FHWA. And that is the permanent record. The data up until then gets stored on a NAS that's local to the bridge office. And Minnesota has some data practices that relate to records retention, and I'm not sure off the top of my head how long our retention time is on the raw data that's collected.
Okay, thank you. Another question, Tony, I believe you mentioned, it was in one of the first few slides that you covered, you mentioned a 48-hour turnaround time. Would you be able to expand on that?
That 48-hour turnaround time, that's kind of a notional, what our working objective is. In aeronautics, we promise to have the flights reviewed, flight plans reviewed within 2 working days. In practice, we've been getting approvals out within a couple hours, depending on whether or not we're requesting changes to flight plans, which, as I mentioned, our operators have gotten pretty good at knowing what we want to see in those flight plans, so haven't had to request a lot recently. Once that happens, then usually the flight crew can go out to the site the next day. And then for smaller areas, post-processing can be done in a couple hours. Our photometrics guys are pretty good about setting up jobs to, process in downtime, and be ready to go pretty much as fast as possible. So in a true natural disaster, we might be looking at a totally different type of workflow where we would be transmitting live video from the drone to a command center or something like that, and we are not experts at that at all. In that type of scenario, from what I understand, North Carolina has done a lot of that, and they found that as long as they had done their planning in advance and gotten things set up, they could do that and get data almost in real time to the people who need it. I don't know if that was the question.
No, that's great. Thank you. All right, and then this next question, Colin, this might be more towards you. Someone asked, what courses do you recommend outside of Part 107, and what are some common application-specific trainings?
Sure. So, we usually recommend that concurrent with Part 107, that folks also go through a basic flight training course, which is really an orientation course on whatever type of systems you're going to be utilizing, if it's multi-rotor systems versus fixed wing systems, et cetera. And that's really to just get familiar with the software, the user interface, the emergency procedures that may be applicable for the particular aircraft that you're dealing with, so that hopefully you can eliminate some of the quote unquote dumb errors and mistakes before they become an issue for you in a professional setting. Once then someone has passed their FAA exam, they've gotten that certificate, and they're either they themselves or their employer has created standard operating procedures that's going to govern the use of the systems in the field. That's really when we recommend doing the operational readiness or the application specific training. And really, the things we recommend, or the things that we offer right now, we offer courses on inspections. So we have roof inspections as well as other structural inspections offerings. We are building curriculum right now for tower inspections, so cell towers and other types of radio towers, et cetera. If it's a mapping and modeling application, we do have a mapping and modeling application specific training. We also have training specific to night operations. If you desire a night waiver and need to operate under a night waiver, we can not only help you obtain that night waiver at this point in time, but also train those folks that are going to be operating under those conditions. It really just depends on the industry that you're in and what it is that you are inspecting. But those are the canned curriculums that we have. We also have quite a few for broadcast media and public safety applications as well, search and rescue, etc. But we've developed one-off customized trainings for our clients as well, working as far as transmission power line inspections, looking at insulators and other components using both visual and thermal imaging. We've worked with folks in oil and gas, looking at flare stack inspections and procedures for that, as well as photogrammetry for both site mapping, we'll say, as well as some inspection-based applications with photogrammetry. So, really it comes down to your needs. If we have a canned topic already, which you can see all those curriculums on our website, those solutions are out there for you and your folks. If it is something that you want to get a bit more specific and really tailor it exactly to your standard operating procedures, or you need some help developing those, we have all of our instructors come from both the manned aircraft world, as well as many of them are full-time professionals in unmanned aircraft. The majority of them are as well. So when we need to develop a new curriculum or bring an instructor into your agency, we're bringing in someone that's worked in that field or is currently working in that field already to provide, help build that curriculum and provide that training. So.
Thanks, Colin. All right, so we'll cover one more question. Tony, someone asked, what live feed system are you guys using?
Okay, I'm sorry. I guess I was unclear on the previous one. We are not generally using live feeds. We are generally recording still photographs and then building models using one of a few different workflows. One of them is Pix4D. One of them is custom photogrammetrics unit software. And we're not set up to do live feeds. For flying, we have whatever's provided by the manufacturer, and we're flying drones made by DJI, but also Altus and SenseFly, and they're all a little bit different.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we'll wrap things up here. That's all the time we have for today. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and a huge thank you to Tony for sharing all of that information. As I mentioned in the beginning, I will be sending out a recording of today's webinar as well as the slide deck. So if any questions come up as you're going through that material, please feel free to either give us a call or email us. We have a full team of experts here at Dart Drones, so whether you're looking for training or consulting, we'd be happy to set you up with the appropriate person and help you out. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope to speak with you all in the future.